Recording in progress.
Good morning, honorable members. Good morning to the team of the AG as well as our support staff. I see that we are now 5. Honorable Du Plessis, you are just in time. Marcia, can you please flag the agenda?
Good morning, Chairperson. Good morning, everybody. I'll do so, Chair.
Honorable members, the agenda is in front of us. I just want to welcome the team from the AG that is going to give us the briefing on the audit outcomes for the Department of Social Development. And welcome to the honorable members as well as our support staff. Welcome to the Select Committee meeting of Social Services. Honorable members, we are now on the point of the adoption of the agenda. Honorable Du Plessis, your hand is up.
Chair, I was just going to move to adopt the agenda, so it was maybe too soon.
No, it's fine. You are on top of it. We can see that you are coming from far away. After you, it's Honorable Adrianse.
My hand was raised, Honourable Chairperson. I move to second the adoption. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Adrianse. Thank you, Honorable Sibande. But we will come to other points where I give you the option to move for the adoption of the apologies, Honorable Sibande. Marcia, can you give us the apologies?
Thank you, Chair. Again, good morning, all. Chairperson, we have received an apology from Ms. Breed. She is currently on oversight. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Marcia. So that is the only apology.
Yes, Chair.
Thank you, Marcia. Honorable Sibande, can you move for the adoption of the apology?
Yes, ma'am. I move for the adoption of the apologies.
Thank you, Honorable Sibande. Honorable Makwele, over to you.
No, I'm seconding also. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Makwele. Honorable members, we are now at the point where we will give over to the Auditor General. But first and foremost, I will just want to indicate to you, honorable members, that the questions that we have for the department, we must separate it from the questions that we have for the AG. Because on the 29th of this month, we are meeting with the Department of Social Development to get a briefing from them in terms of the APP. Not APP, the annual report, and we will have our questions to them at that point. So, honorable members, AG, I will give over to you. Thank you very much.
Point of view before, Chair, if you allow me.
You can proceed, Honorable Makwele.
No, Chairperson, I want to understand you properly to say that we'll only ask questions from the AG, not from the department, because in fact, this thing of us members engaging, sometimes it gives us problem, whereby you'll find that our time for engage, it is always minimal, which it will also not serve a good purpose for us to engage. So if you are saying that we'll only engage the AG and maybe we take note of the presentation of the department, then we'll ask them question when we meet them, then I will agree with you. But other than that, because always we as members, we are always pressed when we come for engagement, especially looking at the time. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you, Honorable Makwele. Honorable Makwele, we only have having a briefing from the AG. So on the 29th of October, we are going to have a briefing from the department. So the department is not part of this meeting. So we will have enough time to engage the AG in terms of their presentation, Honorable Makwele. Is that
Perfect, Chairperson.
because the reason for that is also the time management. Because if we have these two presentations, we don't have enough time to engage properly. So that is the reason why we first are getting the briefing from the AG, and on the 29th, we are getting a briefing from the department. Thank you very much, honorable members. Over to the team of the Auditor General.
Thank you so much, Chair, and good morning, honorable members. My name is Michelle Margaman. I'm the Business Unit Leader within the Office of the Auditor General. I'm also joined with me, Puleng Molapo. He'll actually be taking you through the presentation. We also have Zizipo Makalima, who is from the Office of the Parliamentary Coordination between our office and the Parliament. Chair, we do have with us a presentation that not only talks about the department, as well as the entities within the department, which is the funds, as well as SASSA, as well as the NDA. So we'll give you that comprehensive presentation, and then we'll engage with you then afterwards. Puleng, can you just take the members through?
Good morning, colleagues. Good morning, members. Good morning, Michelle. Good morning, Chair. As Michelle has already indicated, I will then be taking you through the presentation in terms of the audit outcome of the department. For bandage purposes, I will then switch off my camera just for network purposes. I will then now share the screen. Please let me know if you can see my screen.
We can see it clearly, Puleng.
Perfect. As Michelle has already indicated, I think the purpose of this meeting is just to brief the committee in terms of the overall outcome of social development. Then I will then continue starting. As we then start, I would like to just highlight our mission and vision in terms of our mission and what we aspire to be as the Office of the Auditor General. We exist to strengthen our country's democracy, basically by enabling oversight, accountability, and governance in the public sector through our auditing and thereby building our public confidence. We're basically also saying that we want to be recognized by all our stakeholders as a relevant supreme audit institution. So as part of our 2030 strategy, we adopted this 2030 strategy where we're saying that in 2030, we want to see majority of our auditees moving basically from doing harm to doing good. Basically, we want them to move to a culture where they actually is a culture that is actually inspired by performance, accountability, transparency, and institutional integrity. We actually call it a petty culture. Basically, we're saying that if our auditors are basically delivering in terms of their service mandate to meet the needs of the citizens of South Africa, and they are basically accountable in terms of the reporting of the information that has been reported in the financial statement, and those that were found to be responsible for irregularities, there's actually consequence management being implemented on that particular regard. And we're also saying that our auditors should basically be transparent in terms of their reports on that particular regard. So in our next slide is basically a summary of what we do. As we all know, members on the chair, that we are a Chapter 9 institution, and then again, this is just indication in terms of Section 188 of the Constitution that actually indicate the mandate of the Office of the Auditor General. We audit in terms of our Public Audit Act of 25 of 2004. Basically, in terms of that specific act, we are required to actually audit the financial statements, the compliance, and performance against predetermined objectives on that particular regard. As part of our audit report, we normally include any discretionary audits that we're actually doing on investigations and any performance audits that we actually performed on that particular regard. In addition to that, on section 1, we would recall that recently we have also adopted what we call a material irregularity. I will then go into detail on that particular slide in terms of elaborating in terms of what is a material irregularity on that particular regard. On this specific slide, we have what we call accountability ecosystem. Chair, even in our last meeting last day, we touched base on this specific accountability ecosystem. Basically, it's the individuals that we have identified that we're saying that for us to move our auditees from doing harm to doing good, as per the first slide in terms of that petty culture. We then said we've identified officials on the ground. These are the people that are dealing with the day-to-day work. These are the people that are requesting 3 quotations. These are the people that are registering grants and paying grants at SASSA, for an example. We're saying if these specific individuals can do what they are supposed to then do, then we will be able to move this specific culture. And we also identified senior management to say, senior management, if they can review the work that is being done by officials to ensure that in instances where officials are not doing what they're supposed to be doing, then senior managers are able to pick those specific issues up and be in a position to implement consequence management. Consequence management might be in the form of training if those specific officials do not necessarily understand maybe some of the new policies or the day-to-day tasks on that particular regard. We also identified accounting officers, which is our DGs, and accounting authorities, which is our board for NDA and the CEO at SASSA as well, to say the DG, then the board and the CEOs, they need to ensure that they actually develop policies and procedures to help the senior managers and officials, because for the officials to do what they're supposed to be doing on the ground, they need to be governed by policies and procedures. So we then identify the accounting office and accounting authority to actually do that part for us. In addition to that, we've identified the executive authority, which is the minister in this specific case, to then say, let her play an oversight role in terms of the implementation of the mandate of the portfolio at large to ensure that the accounting office and accounting authorities are actually implementing the mandate on that particular regard as well. We have also identified oversight committees like the select committee, the portfolio committees as well, that will also assist us in terms of playing that particular oversight role on that particular regard. As part of our mandate, we then indicated that we want to enhance public confidence thereby through our auditing process. So as part of the influence accountability ecosystem, we have identified ourselves as a center to say that we're not going to be staying back and watching the other guys in the roadmap doing what they're supposed to do. We're going to also work hand in hand with officials, senior management and accounting authority and the minister to actually come with insights. So the insights that are coming out from our audit programs, audit work that we do, we actually share it with these relevant ecosystem members so that we can influence them to actually implement certain recommendations that we then would have identified root causes and wanted to and say, for these specific root causes, these are the recommendations that could be implemented for the department and its entity to actually move to a better state. So that is part of the strategic objectives that we've then identified. In addition to that, in certain instances where we've seen that these recommendations are not being implemented, and as a result, we're seeing that the portfolio itself is suffering financial losses or is suffering harm to the public sector or to the entity at large. We then say we're going to enforce. Part of this enforcement goes hand in hand with our material irregularity. As I indicated, we'll then get in touch on that specific one. So this is the accountability ecosystem that we have then adopted as the office. And now getting into the meat in terms of the overall audit outcomes for the social development portfolio at large. What we have then did is that we did a comparison from the 23-24 to the 24-25 so that we can show the members in terms of whether there's any improvement or a regression from the previous years in terms of the audit outcomes. If we then look in what we call unqualified audit opinion with no findings, that is what we call a clean audit in this specific regard. we're seeing that last year we had 4 auditees that were cleaned. Basically, these 4 are our 4 funds that we have within the portfolio itself. So if we then see that the movement from last year to this year, the 4 funds basically are still clean on this specific one. We have not identified any key issues on that particular regard. But if we then move on to unqualified with findings, so unqualified with findings basically means that the financial statements that were presented to us for audit did not necessarily have any significant issues, or the significant issues would have been corrected as and when we report on the 31st of July. When we do look at 23-24, we've seen 3 auditees, which is basically NDA, SASSA, and the department itself being unqualified with findings. At the department, the findings was mostly on performance information, and then at NTA, it was both performance information and compliance together with SASSA. If we then compare it to the current year, we're seeing that SASSA and NTA has not necessarily improved, so they still have unqualified with findings, basically that for SASSA's purpose specifically, the set of financial statements that were presented to us did not have any material issues. Unfortunately, on compliance with legislation, we still had material compliance in terms of expenditure management, where we have noted that there's similar instances of irregular expenditure occurring at SASSA that resulted in this material non-compliance on that particular regard. We also have identified significant issues on performance information at SASSA and NDA on that particular regard. If we then look into qualified with findings, on the 23-24, we didn't have any qualification on the portfolio at large. If we then look into the 24-25 financial year, we're seeing that there is a qualification at the department itself. This is only because of the set of financial statements that were presented to us on the 31st of May 2025 had material issues on transfers and subsidies to household and receivables on that particular regard. We will also get into more detail in terms of those specific 2 qualification areas on that particular regard. In terms of our overall message, we're saying that the overall portfolio has regressed, as the department itself has basically regressed in terms of a qualification. 2 of the entities within the portfolio itself remain stagnant. We're still showing swift actions were not necessarily implemented to address audit findings, as we have reported similar issues to those that were reported in the previous years, especially on the grants one and then the receivables one, also on certain issues on performance information and compliance on that particular regard. So we're still having significant issues with regards to the disbursements of grants on that particular one, where we don't necessarily have sufficient controls within the system that is actually being used by SASSA to actually disburse those specific grants, where the system is not effectively integrated with other government systems or databases to confirm eligibility of beneficiaries upon application and payment on that particular regard. As I already indicated, in terms of the non-compliance with legislations, we're not prevented, where we have noted some of the similar incidents happening that we have identified in the previous years that were reoccurred in the 24-25 financial year. I guess our overall recommendation is that SASSA should enhance internal controls around the beneficiary payment so that we can eradicate the specific leakages. As we know that currently the fiscus itself is actually in terms of the challenges of actually having sufficient money to actually cover all our expenses. So we are actually suffering on that particular side. So we need to ensure that we actually implement controls to ensure that we don't necessarily have these specific leakages. Within the entities itself, I think one thing that we want to do or want to recommend as well is that the key vacancies, especially at NTA, for the CFO and the CEO, really needs to be filled urgently to ensure that there is some kind of stability within that specific entity, so that we ensure that some of the issues that we have then identified in the current year can then be resolved in the future year. Chair, this slide basically just a summary in terms of the financial statements. So we're gonna go into the financial statements in terms of what we have noted from the set of financial statements themselves in the 24-25 financial year. Chair, you would see that here we have what we call a quality of financial statements submitted for auditing. We did a comparison between the 23-24 and the 24-25 again. So when we say submitted for auditing, we say that as at the 31st of May, the legislated time for the department and entity to submit financial statements. What kind of financial statement did they submit to the Office of the Auditor General? If you look at the 23-24, we're saying that 6 of them, which is basically SASSA, the department, and the 4 and the 4 funds, they actually submitted good quality financial statement, as the AGSA did not identify any material misstatements or issues on those set of financial statements during the audit. So only NDA had that specific issue. But if we then look into the 24-25, we're seeing that only SASSA was able to submit the financial statements that are of good quality. And then we then had material issues at NDA and also at the department at large. So we also then did a comparison of the post-audit in terms of the quality of financial statements. Basically, here we're saying in instances where we then identified this material misstatement on the financial statement that was submitted on the 31st of May, was the department or its entity able to actually fix those specific material misstatements on that particular regard before the 31st of July? So you will see in the 23-24, all 7 of our auditees had no material issues as of 31st July, meaning that even the NDA ones that we've then identified in the 23-24 were able to be correctly adjusted in the set of financial statements, and the financial statements that were tabled in the APR did not have any material issues. When again we step into the 24-25 financial year, we're seeing only 6. Basically, we're seeing SASSA and NDA. Remember, NDA had material issues that we've then identified, but as of the 31st of July 2025, by the time we issue our audit report, they were able to resolve those material issues, resulting in them not necessarily having any material issues in the APR that would have been tabled. As for the department itself, they could not resolve the issues that are relating to transfers and subsidies, basically transfers to households. As we have identified that there were beneficiaries that we could not confirm whether they were supposed to be paid or not paid, as some of their files were missing. So we could not confirm whether those people were eligible or not eligible. And in addition to that, we also noted that the overpayments that were made to beneficiaries was not included as receivables in the financial record. So what then would have happened that if and when we identified that an individual or a beneficiary was not supposed to be paid, the department will then have to include a receivable in the books, because they're basically saying that they have paid Puleng, who was not eligible to receive that specific grant. So it means Puleng received the money that were not supposed to be received. Therefore, Puleng basically owes the department the money back, because he needs to actually pay that specific money back to the department. So we noted that some of the specific individuals were not necessarily included in their receivable books on the financial statements. So if we then look in terms of the overall cause of the specific issues, we're seeing that stability in terms of key position has been an issue, especially at NDA for the CFO and the CEO. This also resulted in some of the specific issues. Also, at the department itself, you would recall, Chair, that the appointment of the CFO and the DG actually happened later in the year. So also this has a direct impact as well in terms of the specific issues. In addition to that, we're saying that there was a lack of review of the financial statements on itself, because what we have noted, especially at the department side, because of the unique relationship that the department has with SASSA, SASSA is actually paying grants, and then after paying those specific grants, the grant expenditure is then recognized in the books of the department. Therefore, the department itself was actually relaxing and waiting for SASSA to actually give them the numbers that have been paid without doing any due care in terms of the numbers to confirm the validity, accuracy, and the completeness of the data that they actually receive from SASSA itself. So currently, they did not have any processes to validate that specific information to ensure that SASSA is paying the right people at the right time. So those are the issues that we've identified. In addition to that, we have noted also that there is a certain reliance on the audit process to identify misstatements. So some of these misstatements at NDA and at the department itself, had there been proper reviews, they would have been identified, but they were identified through the audit process. That's why we then got, for example, NDA, where we identify material issues, but after the audit, they were able to resolve them because the audit actually identifies such issues. So we're saying that if there was proper reviews, management could have picked up some of these issues themselves on that particular regard. So in terms of the overall impact, obviously, we're then saying that this actually limits the portfolio from reporting reliable and accurate and complete financial data. Because as it stands, we're then saying that on the transfers and subsidies, there are certain people that were included in that amount that were not supposed to be paid. We're also saying included in the receivables, there's a lot of people that were supposed to be recognized as receivables, but they were not necessarily included as receivables on that particular regard. So that's basically what we're saying in terms of the financial statement. If we then move on to the next slide, Chair, in terms of compliance with legislation on that particular regard. We also did a very similar comparison to that of the financial statements, just to look in terms of the 23-24 and the 24-25 compliance, excuse me. So we're saying that on the 23-24 financial year, we have identified two audits that had compliance issues. Basically, these two audits was on SASSA and NTA. And then on the department itself, there was no material non-compliance on that particular regard. So on SASSA and NDA, it was mostly on expenditure management. Expenditure management meaning there's a certain incidence of irregular expenditure, of fruitless and wasteful expenditure that is reoccurring while it was identified in the previous financial years. And then the audit recommendations were issued to management. So management could have then avoided that specific one. If we then move into the 24-25 financial year, we've seen that the non-compliance actually increased to the three auditees, which is basically the department itself, SASSA and NDA. On the department itself, the non-compliance is with regard to Section 40 of the PFMA, where it actually says that the department needs to ensure that the financial statements that are presented for audit are supported by reliable and accurate information and are in accordance with the accounting framework. In this case, it's going to be MCS. So due to the issues that we have then identified in the set of financial statement, we're then saying that the department itself did not comply with that specific section within the PFMA itself. That together with NDA, we're saying that at NDA, though they were able to correct these issues from the date that they submitted, the financial statements that were initially submitted were not necessarily in compliance, as material issues were then identified on that particular regard. And then on the issues of SASSA itself, we're then saying that the prevention of irregular expenditure on that particular regard resulted in a material non-compliance. As I indicated, similar instances of irregular expenditure from last year to this year were then identified on that particular regard. We then go back again to NDA. We then say at NDA, we're seeing that the effectiveness of consequence management, there's a very slow response in implementing consequence management on that particular regard. You will see when we get to the slide of consequence management in terms of the number of cases that have not been investigated in NDA. So that is something that we are actually worried about. So that in itself, that we then resulted in a material paragraph on that particular regard. And the last one of the non-compliance that we have identified is with regard to the Public Service Regulation 25, which actually says that There should be specific informations that are implemented by the department in terms of the monitoring of the progress in terms of achieving the target. So we're then saying that the department itself did not necessarily have systems in place to then identify some of the weaknesses coming out from the performance information side, but we will then go on the slide of performance information where we identify significant issues that we have identified on that particular regard. So these are the non-compliance that we have then identified. And some of the causes of this compliance basically is inadequate reviews and monitoring in terms of compliance with procurement and legislations at SASSA that resulted in repeat issues. We're saying inadequate consequence management at both NDA and the department on that specific one. And then we're also saying that inadequate review process to ensure regular and accurate and completeness of reports that are supported by reliable information. This again relates to the issues that we've identified on the performance information side. I think we'll cover it in our few slides that are coming out. So the impact again on this specific compliance, on this slide, we're not necessarily seeing, but when you go deeper in terms of some of the leakages that we have then identified, you will see that as a result of, for example, the department not necessarily having controls to validate whether the correct people were actually being paid, this results in some of the leakages that we've then identified on the grant system. As a result, again, of not having systems and processes in terms of reporting performance information, we're seeing a lack of credible performance and financial reporting. Basically, what we're saying is that, for example, on transfers and subsidies, on receivables, on performance information, with all the indicators that we've identified material issues, we're saying even if they are tabled, those information cannot be relied on because we then had issues with those specific numbers that are actually reported. We're also saying that consequence management, if we're not necessarily investigating cases, we're then saying that we are not necessarily holding officials accountable for the transgressions. Basically, create a culture of saying, Pule, you can continue doing what you're doing, wrong or right, no one is going to hold you accountable. So even next year, I can do the similar incident and nothing is going to happen. I won't be taken for training, disciplinary hearing, if there's anyone in letters or anything that needs to happen in terms of that specific one. We're also saying that deficiency in strategic planning affect delivery basically of the legislative mandate. And again, we're going to see these things also happening at NDA as an example, where you're realizing that a significant amount of the budget is basically spent on employee cost and not necessarily on service delivery. So these are the issues, these are the impact of this specific non-compliance on that particular regard. Chair, if I can then move on to the next slide. This slide here talks about weaknesses in procurement and contract management. Chair, as I indicated, on procurement and contract management, we have not really identified any key or material issues. Though there were issues that are coming out, they were not so significant or material to be elevated in our audit report. But maybe, Chair and honorable members, just to get to just to give you a gist of what is happening within the portfolio itself. On the department itself is not really a tender-driven department because they don't procure too much in terms of values above $1 million, right? So on their side, a lot of their procurement is mostly on quotation. The culture that we have noted there as well is a culture of saying, the legislation says you need to get 3 quotations. And if you can't get 3 quotations, then you need to document the reasons why you didn't get 3 quotations. So what officials would do, those officials that we've identified in our accountability ecosystems, we will see an official then say, let me request the bare minimum. So they will request from Michelle, Buleng, and Zizipo to say, please, we want to procure 15 chairs as an example. Then they send out these 3 quotations, three RFQs to these 3 suppliers. And Buleng will be the only one that then respond, and the 2 other suppliers don't respond. What then happens there, if Buleng, for example, says, each chair I'm going to quote it 10,000 as an example, while the chair should be 1,000. The supply chain official is going to document the reasons to say only one person responded, therefore continue with procurement. So after that, those reasons will then be accepted. But the danger with that is that if the chairs were supposed to be bought at 1,000, you're now buying them at 10,000. So actually, there's a bit of loss that you're actually incurring on that particular regard. While if you could have sent the RFQ to as many suppliers as possible, you are almost guaranteed that if you send more would be able to respond. My logic has always been in the current economy that people are facing, if I get an RFQ from a legitimate person, I would be able to respond because every one of us in this day of the economy need that particular business. So a lot of people will be responding. And when you get as many quotations as possible, that protects you because then you have a pool of number of people that you can actually evaluate and ensure that when you procure at a much competitive price. So that will actually protect the department. So that is the current culture that we're noting at the department itself. At SASSA itself, the biggest risk is mostly on the cleaning contracts and your security contracts. So on the 26 million of irregular expenditure that we have identified here, 23 million of it is still under assessment. The irregular expenditure framework currently allows a situation where if the AG raises a specific finding and then the entity itself has a different view to it, especially if there might be those technical glitches where it's not clear, then the legislation then says that we then need to go back to the process owner, which National Treasury, to then look into the merits of the finding, and then they will then basically give their view as to whether it is or it is not. So the 23 million currently is regarded as under assessment. So I'm not going to go too much into detail. But again, it goes back to the cleaning and the security contract because of the fact that SASSA itself has different regions within the country and different offices, local offices. The procurement actually is decentralized within those specific regions. So there is a risk that they might not necessarily follow those specific prescripts on that particular regard. Similar with NDA, I think majority of them will be on quotations on that particular regard. So with regards to the issues that we have identified, we also identified instances at the department where the procurement were procured on an emergency cases while it is not really an emergency case, but a certain preferred supplier or an agent case. So it's not necessarily an emergency. So the reasons that were documented there were not meeting those of an emergency on that particular regard. Also at SASSA, we noted that there is ineffective contract monitoring. Honorable members and the chair, this 252 million is not irregular, but it's just the value of the contract. So we noted that this specific contract was not actually monitored. So if you go back to the contract itself between SASSA and this specific supply, we're noting that this specific supplier, as part of the contract, in instances where they are not delivering, SASSA is supposed to invoke certain penalties. So in these specific cases, because of lack of contract monitoring, you won't be able to identify instances where supplier is not necessarily delivering. Therefore, you lose on that specific penalty that you were supposed to then invoke on that particular regard. So this is the instance. Currently, it's not a huge amount that we're supposed to. I think it's about 66,000 penalty that they were supposed to invoke on the specific contract, but they didn't actually invoke on that one. Also, what we have also noted is that last year there was a GBV command center. There was a supplier that was in charge of the GBV command center that was not necessarily delivering. We went there to check, and we've noted that the GBV command center at the time last year was not operating. Even coming through the current year, there were certain months where the command center was not necessarily operating, but the supplier was being paid. So we further went back and investigated whether the payments that were being made, there was any value for money. And we've noted about 1.2 million that has been paid where the services basically was not rendered. There was no value for these specific services that were provided. This 1.2 that was provided or paid to this specific supplier. So these are the weaknesses that we've then identified or on the procurement and contract management. If we then jump into irregular expenditure slide, Chair, you will see that, as I already indicated in the previous slide, that we didn't have material issues on compliance, on procurement and contract management, but we're seeing that there is a bit of an improvement in terms of the irregular expenditure amount. So if you look at the comparison from the 23-24 to the 24-25, we're seeing the overall portfolio being on 7 million. So even if, let's say, for example, Treasury comes back and say, no, the two issues that we've identified at SASSA are irregular, you will still be getting to about 30 million. So it's still an improvement in terms of the irregular expenditure that the portfolio is actually incurring. So this, I think, is something that we just need to applaud the portfolio, and we need to ensure that they still continue to implement those specific controls to ensure that they don't identify more irregular or incur additional irregular expenditure on that particular regard. I think one of the key things that we just want to elevate or to identify here, especially at NDA, is the performance bonus that were not paid in accordance with the board approval. So this is one of the irregular expenditure that we have then identified at NDA. So within the 7 million itself, we're seeing the biggest contributor would be at DSD itself, which will be that emergency procurement there. You will see the contract value 17 million, but the irregular expenditure will be limited to what has been paid to the supplier on the specific one. And it also be those specific instances where we've identified that the quotations were not necessarily obtained. At SASSA as well, we've identified instances again where contracts are entered to without the approval from the relevant delegated official. And as I indicated, NDA, we're also seeing the performance that were paid without the relevant approval on that particular regard. Chair, if I then can move on to the next slide in terms of consequence management and the dealing of the balance itself. So here we're dealing with the balance of irregular expenditure that have been identified over the previous years. So if you look at last year, for example, the closing balance of irregular expenditure for the portfolio at large was 196 million. And then from that 196 million, you've seen that they actually dealt with about 384 million of irregular expenditure. So in terms of the consequence management and investigation and condoning and removal of irregular expenditure, they were able to deal with a significant amount of irregular expenditure. Then the balance that was not dealt with was 196. This 196, we come with it to the 24-25, and then we're seeing that only 59 million, or about 60 million of it has been dealt with, and we currently left with 136 million. As I indicated, Chair, when I was indicating on the first few slides about the consequence management issues, you're seeing that within this 136 million, the biggest contributor of it is 82 million of NDA. What does this say? It says that there is a slow response in dealing with this irregular expenditure, dealing with consequence management. You also take it back to number 3 bullet point in terms of reasons for irregular expenditure not being dealt with. You're seeing NDA having about 25 cases that has not yet even started to be investigated. So you then see that if we are not really investigating, how can we implement consequence management on that particular regard? We then say we're still gonna see a lot of incidents again that might come in where certain similar issues are coming up on that particular regard because of this lack of consequence management. We're also seeing again, although it did not come as a material non-compliance on the department itself, we're still seeing that 45 million is still a huge number that has not been dealt with by the department on that particular regard. So this is something that we're also saying, let us just zoom into the specific one so that in the future years, it does not become an issue. On the side of SASSA, it's 10 million. I think in terms of the numbers from SASSA's perspective, we've seen a significant improvement in this specific area of consequence management on that particular regard. So we're also saying that they are doing well, but we just need to continue to monitor to ensure that they don't necessarily go back to instances where they have significant numbers of irregular expenditure that is not dealt with. If I then move on to the next slide, Chair, in terms of key findings on information technology environment, I think a lot of them we've already been covered in terms of the systems themselves that are not fully linked with other systems, creating some of the weaknesses in terms of the grant system itself. What we have noted is the availability of the grant systems that was not necessarily stable during the year, that hindered in terms of users for capturing information and verifying some of the grants application when they were applied or payments on that particular regard. We have noted ineffective systems controls on the social grant payment systems. And in addition to that, we have noted delays in some of the IT projects on that particular regard. Some of these causes of the findings is basically system outages. As I said, it was not necessarily stable in certain instances where beneficiaries wanted to then apply. Some of the things they could not necessarily apply, verification could not happen on that specific one. We're also saying that it's inadequate planning and lack of dedicated IT budgets. Also, we're saying ineffective governance and oversight from basically the CEO and the DGs on that particular regard. Again, the impact of this one talks to, again, the leakages that we're seeing, again, on the grant systems, exposure for the department and agencies to fraud and misappropriation. We will have seen the number of cases that have been reported in the media, especially on the grants beneficiaries as well. Lastly, we say inability to produce credible financial and performance results, because as a result of this, we then seeing this specific qualification coming out on the receivables and the payments on that specific regard. Chair, if I can then move on to that material irregularity that I said I will deal with in terms of the PAA1. I just to reflect back, Chair, we would have then also touched base on this specific item in our previous meeting as well. But just to refresh members as well in terms of the definition of our material irregularity, is basically any non-compliance or contravention with legislation as a result of fraud, theft, or breach of federal duties that could have resulted in a likely financial loss or misuse of material public resource, substantial harm to a public sector institution or general public at large that would have been identified during our audit process itself. So with all these issues that we've then identified, we're now in the process of saying, with the losses that we've then identified and the non-compliance, we then go back to the definition of material irregularity. Does it meet the material irregularity? Is it something that we then want to actually issue or something like that? So this is currently the assessment that we're actually doing. And some of the steps that we can take as the officers per the PAA is basically to refer the material irregularity to any relevant public body. It could be the SIU on that particular regard, or the Hawks, or in addition to that, what we can also do is that we can recommend actions in the audit report through our recommendations. We can then say, let's include the specific recommendations. There are certain instances where we then identify material irregularity and we issue it to the department or to the entities, and the entities will then come back to us within 20 days and indicate that these are the steps that we are taking to address the MI. In those instances, we actually afford the accounting office and accounting authority to actually continue investigating and implementing consequence management and improving in terms of internal controls, and also in certain instances recover those specific financial losses. Also, one of the issues that we can also do in instances where we're seeing that recommendations are not being implemented, remedial actions are not implemented, the accounting office is not doing anything to address the MI, we can issue a certificate of debt on that particular regard to the accounting authority. If I then bring this concept of material irregularities back to the portfolio, we're saying that within the portfolio itself, we have identified 6 material irregularities, 1 at the department and 5 at SASSA. We have not identified any material irregularity, at NTA. Majority of the material irregularities that we have identified at SASSA itself would have been on procurement and payment. and 1 on fraud. So we then identified instances where payments, for example, we would then have those ones for CPS where payment were made without any services being rendered is the 76 million and the 316 million that Chair, even in the previous years, we indicated that those have been resolved. But as part of our processes of material irregularity, though they've been resolved, we do follow up in terms of the recovery of the specific financial loss. What is the current state in terms of the CPS financial loss of the 316 million and the 76 million? We have noted that currently SASSA is trying to recover money from CPS, but CPS is currently under liquidation. So we have to wait for the process of liquidations to be finalized to see how much money can SASSA recover. What we know in terms of the current information is that CPS is saying that they have about 10 to 15 million in their books, and within that 10 to 15 million, there are other payables that are also claiming money from CPS through this liquidation process. So we'll wait for this liquidation process to then unfold to see how much money can SASSA recoup from CPS. And after that, what more can SASSA do to try to recoup the money? Can they try to go after the former CEO to see that if there is anything that can be recovered? So those are the things that SASSA will then have to see what then needs to be done on that specific one. Chair and honorable members, you will see that we're also saying that in the overall process itself, there would have been an MI that we have identified during the COVID days, where we're saying that there were beneficiaries that claimed the SRD 350 grants that were not necessarily eligible to claim that particular 350 grants because of the weaknesses at the time that were there in the process itself. We have identified that as a material irregularity and issued to management. Management have went and investigated and identified additional people. But one of the good stories that we are noting here is about 167 million has been recouped or recovered. So how they recover it is to say, if Puleng, during the COVID day, you were working for the Office of the Auditor General, and then you claimed the SRD 350 grants, and due to the weaknesses at the time, you were paid these 350 grants. Now you are no longer employed. You're not getting any income. Now you want SRD 370. So if you then want 370, you still apply on that specific month. If then we then identify that you already benefited at the time that you were not supposed to benefit, then we withhold that money to say, then we recoup because you were paid that time. It means that positive and minus, then we then get that money back. So part of this 167 is the money that have been withheld for those that incorrectly received grants in the past. Currently, we know that SASSA and the department has about 33 million that has not been allocated. This is certain instances where Puleng would have paid SASSA back, but they did not use a reference number, so they could not necessarily trace the money to a specific beneficiaries. Currently, they are implementing controls in terms of how they can then try to then allocate some of the specific and allocated receipts to the specific beneficiaries so that the number can go up. So I think this is one of the good stories that we've identified. Over and above that, what we also saw, we saw about 10 officials that went through the disciplinary process. Some were completed and some are still in progress. We have seen the department and SASSA instituting about 5 investigations. Also, what we have noted is that we also noted about 3 internal controls that were improved within the portfolio itself. So those would have been on the 5 and the 1 that is at the department. If I then go and just zoom into the department itself, Chair, you will recall last day we indicated that this MI at the department is as a result of procurement of assets at amounts that were higher than the market value. So we did raise the specific MI and issued to the DG. The DG responded to us and indicated that they are taking steps to address the MI. And yes, indeed, we have seen the investigation being happening. We have seen improvement in terms of controls, in terms of the updating of the policies, of the supply chain policies. However, the current challenge is the finalization of disciplinary hearings and the recovery of the financial loss. We have noted a slow response in terms of dealing with those specific disciplinary process and recovery of that financial loss. So we also recommending to the select committee to say, even within this meeting that is coming up, where the department and SASSA will then be presenting their 2024-25 APR, maybe let's just keep a close monitoring in terms of this specific material irregularity to ensure that we actually get to a point whereby the DG actually fast track this disciplinary hearing and the recovery of this specific financial loss on that particular regard. So that's this in terms of our MIs within the portfolio. If we then get into the service delivery part of it, in terms of performance side of it, you would have recalled, Chair and honorable members, there was a slide there that talks about the impact of the specific performance information. And I indicated that within the three entities, which is SASSA, NTA, and the department itself, we have identified material findings on the performance report. So we have identified instances where the achievements were not necessarily reliable. Basically, when we go back to the source or evidence, they are not tying back to the evidence, they are not tying back to the schedules. We have identified indicators that measures and performance of core functions when excluded from the annual performance plan for the department itself. The measures of indicators relating to the centers and the shelters relating to GBV were removed from the annual performance plan, so they were not included on that particular one, resulting in the completeness of key performance indicators on the annual performance plans. We have noted that the performance information is not consistent with planned information. So what they have initially planned and what they've reported is not necessarily aligning on that particular regard. So the biggest impact of this specific one, I think I've already covered it mostly, is that systems were not implemented to enable monitoring of progress made toward achieving targets and core targets and service delivery at the department. We're also saying that there is a decline in terms of the quality of service provided, potentially impacting the eradication of poverty, which again links to the mandate of the NDA on that particular one. We're saying there's no systems in place to track inquiries that are received from the public at SASSA on that particular regard. And then one of the key causes of this specific one we have noted is a lack of reviews. Chair, if I may to just explain here, what we have noted in some instances is some simple errors that could have been identified had they been reviewed. For example, a duplication test. On Excel, if you just run a duplication test, already gives you the number of duplicates that you can already eliminate on that particular. That on its own just shows you that there is no element of a review of this performance information, because we get the inconsistency issues, we get the completeness of core mandates, not necessarily that I'm promoting that, but there are certain errors that we really should not be getting. For example, those duplication tests, the agreeing of the schedule supporting the APR to the numbers that are included in the APR. If the schedule has 10, on the APR, it should at least have 10. Whether they're valid or not valid, but at least at the bare minimum, the 10 should talk to the 10. Then that would be something. So those are the kind of issues that we've then identified in terms of the performance information at large. And then if we then go against performance against the targets itself, here we're just concentrating on the key targets that we've then identified. For example, eligible beneficiaries receiving social grants. This target was achieved as the beneficiaries that are eligible are also receiving grants. Much as we've identified leakages, but there are a lot of people that are supposed to be getting grants that aren't really getting grants. And we will approach SASSA and the department on that specific one, because they are meeting the mandate, they are alleviating poverty on those specific group of individuals. What we've noted again on percentage of children below the age of 1 receiving the children grant. This again is a bit of a concern on our side. What we're seeing, we did a comparison in terms of the numbers themselves. If you go back from 22-23 to 23-24 and to the 24-25, you're seeing the number going down. That for us tells us that either, I don't think it's a matter of that children below 1, their livelihood are fine and their parents are well off, and then they are not within the vulnerable groups. It might be as a result that the parents of these children below 1, they are not aware of the grant itself, because you can get a child support grant as early as possible. But what we're getting is that there might be that lack of awareness from the beneficiaries themselves to register for grants below the age of 1. So we then said to SASSA, maybe let's create a bit of awareness. Let us ensure that even in hospitals, in public hospitals, in clinics, there is that kind of message so that people are aware that there is this grant that they can actually get at an early age, so that we improve on this specific number. So currently they did not meet their overall target in the current financial year. With regard to percentage of inquiries resolved within stipulated timeframes, what we have noted here is that there were significant material findings that we have noted. As I indicated, there's no systems in place to track all the inquiries that have been received by SASSA in terms of beneficiaries, from the beneficiaries themselves. So what could be inquiries? Inquiries could be a mother that recently gave birth to a child and inquiring whether the child will be eligible or not eligible. So if you don't have the systems in place and the process in place to track all the inquiries, it means that that particular mother could have called for this specific inquiry, but the inquiry could not be resolved or could not be tracked, or no one could know what happened to the specific inquiry, and therefore resulting in this mother not necessarily knowing whether the child is eligible or not eligible for the specific grant. So these are the issues that we've then identified. In addition to that, we have noted that this specific indicator has now been changed to track the number of incoming calls. So currently we raised it when we reviewed our annual performance plan for the 25-26, to say what would be the impact. Yes, Puleng did call and inquired, but did you resolve the inquiry? How long did it take for you to resolve the inquiry? If you're not tracking yourselves on these things, what is the impact of the specific indicator? Yes, people can call and call and call. Then you're more likely going to achieve your target. If you targeted 1,000 calls coming in, 1,000 calls came in. But what is the impact? And what about the walk-ins? What about pulling in Matatiela that walks into a local office to do an inquiry? Do we track those specific individuals? What about someone in the Northern Cape that is using the internet to send an email about a specific inquiry? Are we tracking those specific individuals? So those are the discussions that we had with management on the specific change that they have made. So these are the things that we say in committee, maybe also look into those specific ones. Overall, in terms of the overall targets, even those ones that we did not audit, we're seeing DSD achieving about 73%, SASSA 74%, and NDA about 83% of their annual targets for the 24-25 financial year. Again, some of these numbers here, on our side, we calculated those ones that had issues, then have a different impact. You will see that maybe when the department and SASSA then present their ones, they might not necessarily take into account some of the issues that we then identified. In terms of the observations, as I indicated on the financial statement on the impact, to say the impact itself is losses that SASSA and the department are suffering. We're seeing this in terms of the observations for the current year on the grant payments, to say what we have noted is that as I said, that about 73,600 beneficiaries in payment were paid without beneficiary files. Basically, files were missing, so we don't know whether those beneficiaries that were paid are eligible or ineligible. So we were limited on that particular regard. The total amount that has been paid, estimated total amount that has been paid for those specific grants is about 1.7 billion. Also, we have noted that there's a means testing issue where beneficiaries that are on PERSAL or GPF who do not meet the means test requirements continue to benefit and receive grants. Those are people that would be earning salaries elsewhere of alternative income that would not necessarily meet some of the means tests or the number of amount that you need to have on an annual basis for you to be eligible for grants. And also, this is some of the issues that we've identified in the current year. We also noted issues with regard to duplicate Quad 7 beneficiaries on that particular one that resulted in some of the issues. Also on the missing files as well, we know that even in the previous year, there was a fraud in Eastern Cape of about 55 million, where beneficiaries were created on the system without any files. You also link it to the 260 million fraud that have been identified in Johannesburg. Some of the incidents there was that beneficiaries were identified without valid files on that particular regard. Again, if I move on to the next one, Chair, we will see that we also have beneficiaries this outside the country. Yes, the number is small now because even from our side. So what happens here, maybe if I can just give a bit background. One of the key controls, some of the controls within the SASSA Social Service Act, Social Assistance Act, is that beneficiaries outside the country for a period more than 3 months should not be getting any grants unless certain conditions are met. What we then identified is that SASSA does not have any control to identify that a beneficiary was outside the country for a period of more than 3 months. So if I was in the US for the past 12 months and I've been enjoying the social grants, SASSA would not know. So currently there's no system. So on our side, we did a very high level just to check the people that were outside, that were deceased and outside the country for a period of more than 3 months. And this is the number that we've identified. It's something that we will also look into the next year to see the extent of numbers. So we're also trying to implement processes and procedures to then get to the full extent of the specific number itself. The number could be more than what we actually reported. We also seen that SASSA continuously still pays beneficiaries with invalid IDs. This would be IDs that Home Affairs would have then regarded them as invalid, only due to they are either fraudulent or there's other problems with those specific ones. But SASSA still continue to pay those specific individuals. I've already spoke about the means testing ones where people are on PERSAL and GPF. We're also seeing grants being paid to deceased beneficiaries again, where certain beneficiaries have already died, and then they are still money still being withdrawn for those specific grants. And I also already indicated the duplicate Quad 7 numbers that are being used to withdraw grants on that particular regard. So those are the observation on the leakages on the grant system. If I then come to then the GBV and the GBV Command Center, Chair, I would have indicated the 1.2 million that have been paid to a supplier where no services was rendered for GBV. So I indicated that at certain months, even in the current year, where there were no services basically that were rendered. You will see here on this graphic that for May, June, up until November, mid-November, there was no operation of this command center itself. The department continued to procure Vodacom as a new service provider to then assist with the GBV command center from November. And then you can see the spike going up in terms of the number of calls that have been received by Vodacom in terms of the GBV command center. Again, if you look at the second graphics here, you see Gauteng having the highest number of calls that have been received. But we're also noting that Eastern Cape and Northern Cape, if you look at the statistics from the SAPS, you'll see that they report the numbers of GBV cases that have been reported as similar. But if you then go to the command center, you're seeing about only 10% of Eastern Cape is being reported in the Northern Cape. So this again maybe is an indication that there is a level of awareness in terms of the command center. maybe our people are not aware that there is a command center that they can call in situations whereby they are victims of GBV. Because one of the good things, of the good stories that are coming out from the command center itself is that there is a social worker there that is there that you can call that will be able to counsel you. And in instances whereby you don't necessarily have a shelter, they can actually take you to they can refer you to go to a nearest shelter, unlike going home to the same perpetrator that has been abusing you. So I think this is one of the good stories that the department is doing on this specific regard. The one thing that we just need to do is just create a bit of awareness so that people are aware of the specific command center. But I know that there was an advert on Radio 2000 as well that I had where Department of Health and the command center was working together, where they were actually advertising this specific number. So that is one of the good initiatives as well that is coming out on that specific one. Chair, honorable members, if we then look into the analysis of the NDA budget, I've already covered it indirectly to then indicate that a significant amount of the money that NDA is getting is basically for employee cost. About 80% of it is basically spent on employee cost. And then you add again those bonuses that were paid without the approval of the board. Again, you're seeing these are the issues that we then identified. And this is actually impacting on them meeting their mandate in terms of eradication of poverty and providing funding to the service organization on that particular regard. So we then say that in terms of recommendation, the organization needs to clearly define its service delivery goals and allocate resources accordingly, and explore other ways of getting funding. For an example, if there's any ways, maybe go back to the drawing board and see what more can we do, or where else can we source money to ensure that we actually meet our service delivery at NDA. Our overall message to the select committee, Michelle, I don't know if you want to take this one or if I continue.
Thanks, Buleng. I can summarize for us because I see that time is on our side. Chair and committee members, we're just summarizing the root causes for all the findings that Buleng has just gone through, as well as recommendations that we've given the committee, as well as commitments that we did get from the minister. And one of them, in terms of the root causes, we are saying that the internal control deficiencies on the grant administration were not addressed. There's a lack of oversight over the grant disbursements by the department as the custodian. Consequence management is not adequately implemented. And also there's a lack of processes to review the annual performance report to confirm the validity, accuracy, and completeness of reported achievements. In terms of the recommendations, we did recommend that the minister should ensure that the biometrics is implemented for both the beneficiaries as well as employees. This will, we believe it will alleviate some of the fraudulent transactions that we do see happening. We also recommend that SASSA and DSD should use the South African banks as well as the assistance of National Treasury to perform the means test. I think the banks have all our information, so they should be able to assist to see how much do I earn and who am I actually to be able to be eligible for the grants. And then we say that the consequence management should be implemented timeously, both at SASSA, NDA, as well as the one at DSD. And the vacancies at the NDA should be filled almost immediately, as well as the inspectorate at the department, because the inspectorate is the one that actually goes and monitors the grants disbursements as well throughout the SASSA offices. The commitments, the minister did provide us with the commitments that do speak to our recommendations, and they are there. There's about 3 of them that are there. In terms of the committee, we are saying to the committee, and we do request that the committee also monitor the improvement of the controls. We did get commitment that the biometrics will be done. They will look at, they also confirmed that they will also reach out to SARS to see what their system is, what kind of system they're utilizing, and if they can also utilize something similar to SARS. So we're saying to the committee, if you can also improve the progress that is being made in terms of that disbursement system. We also ask in the committee to look at the material irregularity to see how far the department is in resolving the material irregularity before we take it to the next level, which is the remedial action. And then also monitor the filling of the vacancies throughout the portfolio. Chair and honorable members, this is our presentation from our side. We can then, I'll hand back over to you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Thank you very much to Pauline for the informative presentation. Honorable members, we had the presentation. Any takes from your side as honorable members in terms of the presentation? Honorable Adrianse, you are first.
Honorable Sibande.
All right. Take note, Honorable Sibande. Take note, Honorable Mokoele. Can we start with as well as Honorable Achubeni? Honorable Adrianse, over to you.
Thank you, Honorable Chairperson. I just want to stress the fact that I appreciate this presentation, first of all, and the work that went into it. It's very important that we have a true reflection of what's really going on. Thank you also for the reflection on SASSA, because that's a huge concern to me. And it's clear that the major steps and intervention that's needed hasn't been implemented as yet. My question is, as part of the consequence management, has cases been opened? And maybe this should rather be directed at the department, but criminal cases in this case is imminent. And has it been opened? And what's the thoughts of the AG on this? Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Adrianse. Honorable Sibande.
Chairperson, I really don't know where to start because to me, I feel it's very, very tough about the things which they have raised. I can hear at the end the recommendation to the committee is a feeling of vacancies and also the compliance, but to me it's not enough. You see, there are areas where I will seek for a clarity and also to see how to deal about it. Number one, you see, in terms of the Auditor General, in fact, they've indicated that they are Chapter 9 institution in Section 188 and also in Public Audit Act of 25 of 2024. And also, they've raised the issue of Section 40 of the PFMA. But as they given us this report, the issues most is non-compliance. And they've indicated that the portfolio has regressed. Also, the issue of the disperse of grants because of non-compliance. Now, where I'm going to, you see, my worry, Chairperson, is that we must be assisted here. Like, to be specific, if in terms of non-compliance, like if we can be taken on board, that, for an example, in order to heal a wound, we must know exactly that, like in SASSA and NDA, that we must know exactly that this person and this management, they are the ones who are not complying. I think that one can assist us a lot. Rather than to be overall broad, it's not specific that where is the wound. And then also, there is a thing which is worrying me, which they've raised about the issue of senior management. which are lacking of reviewing performance. To me, it was going to be very much easier to get exactly that in this portfolio, this senior management is failing us, this one is failing us. For an example, they've indicated that 2024 to 2025, we are paying 73,664 people an amount of 1.7 billion. This to me is too much. It's too much. And then also, in one of the slides, they indicated about, they've said some of the follow-ups they were done and they've recouped some of the money, which is 167 million. But what about the 136 million which is not accounted, which they've mentioned earlier on? And then here, they also indicated about the fraud in some of the provinces, like in Eastern Cape, that fraud matter, and also in Quebec, the fraud matter. But what is the status quo at the moment? Were these people arrested or not? So that this must form part of the recommendation to the committee, so that the committee can be able to recommend exactly that which people must be taken to task. Because again, the causes of compliance findings, they indicated that it is an inadequate review of what monitoring and compliance in SASSA. The thing which is there, which is worrying me, is the consequence management, and also the issue of internal audit in terms of compliance. And then I wanted to make it a summary because I've got a lot, man, which is worrying me. The danger, the issue of which they've made an example of most procurements, they depend on quotations, which can lead to the inflation of the danger, which can lead to inflation of inflating of prices. But myself, in my side, they must give more to us. What are their recommendations to the committee, except these two which they've made, the issue of compliance and the filling of vacancies? What else recommendation which is given to us, so that also we mustn't be fined on the side of the offenses of the people who are doing offenses to this portfolio, because we form part of the people of accounting officers in terms of the PFMA. So that is my request, and then I'll put it there, man, because it's worrying, man. It's worrying. If you were following it properly, the senior management relies on audit process to identify mistakes. You see, that is the problem. Lack of review of financial statements itself. Who are these people? They must state exactly so that we can act. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you, Honorable Sibande. Honorable Mokwele.
No, thanks very much, Chairperson, and greetings to my colleagues, honorable members, also the officials in our present. Chairperson, maybe without much ado, let me join others by welcoming the presentation. That indeed the presentation was very informative. When I was listening to the presentation, I also realized that given to what was transpired before, there is at least an improvement. In particular, previously there were the number of people who were getting SASSA grant unlawfully or those that they were not deserving, there were many, but at least now, with the current system that they are using, especially with the collaboration with Home Affairs and SARS, they are able to cap some of those elements. But Chairperson, there was an issue that I also wanted to check regarding the issue of audit opinion, whereby they were saying that there was an element of regress in terms of audit opinion, whereby we all know that when they talk of unqualified audit opinion, it's not that, even though it's not that bad audit opinion, but our view is that we must always strive to make sure that we always maintain our clean audit, because when they talk of unqualified opinion, meaning that there are some other issues that the Auditor General may still raise, which is a worrying factor to me, which I wanted to check why there is a regress, because when you are doing a good thing, you must always maintain. But another worrying factor is that that they were able to get a certain percentage of people who are receiving grant who are consistently abroad. Because remember, not every person qualified for a grant. When they are able to trace those people, are they able also to check their financial status? Because I'm not saying that there is something wrong when an old granny who's earning a grant, who's having his family abroad, she can't visit there, but they need also to check the financial status of those people, so that we know that a grant, colleagues, as we all know, that grant, yes, for people that are elderly, in the main, grant also mean to people who can't afford, even if I might be old, but my financial status always, sometimes they might make me not to qualify for a grant. So those are the issues. But other than that, Chairperson, I've been covered by other colleagues, which I don't want to repeat exactly what they've asked, because when we ask questions, we ask for all of us, not for specific honorable members. So I would like to pause here, Chair, and also to thank you for affording me the opportunity, but also to encourage the SASSA in particular that they need to make sure, because that grant that we provide as the government, it makes sure that it alleviates the poverty level that is there in the country. We must make sure that at all time, those who will be founding on the wrong side of the law, they must be dealt with. But I also wanted to assure on their last statement to say that they also wanted us as the select committee, as and when we'll be doing oversight, whatever we get from where we are as and when we are doing oversight, we must always make sure that we assist the department. I thank you, Chairperson, once again for affording me the opportunity.
Thank you, Honorable Makwele. Honorable Machubeni.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chair. Greetings to you, greetings to the honorable members and the department. Chair, let me first appreciate the report as the new member of this committee. And also, all members partly covered me concerning the cases that the cases were opened in these incidents, because it is not right the payments that was paid to someone who is not your beneficiary. How come you pay someone who is not your beneficiary and then there is nothing that is happening? And also, I'm partly covered the issue of e-monitoring and compliance that was mentioned by Honorable Sibanda. let me put emphasis, Chair. We need to fast track the issue of awareness and involvement of headmen in our areas to reach the information to our people. Really, it's painful. Our people, there are no awarenesses. We hear things in social medias. If there's something that is happening in this department, we've heard in social media. There are no awarenesses that is happening. And sometimes you find out our people, they did not get, like there was this incident of change cards. You find our people did not hear that thing because there was no awarenesses. This thing was socialized. So without wasting any time, Chair, that is my concern of the awareness. Other than that, I'm partly covered by latter speakers. Thank you very much, Chairperson.
Thank you very much, Honorable Mochubeni. From my side, Michelle and Pauline. In terms of slide 5, the AG indicated that beneficiaries continue to be paid even without evidence files or beneficiary files. So I just want to get clarity from your side. So what process? Is it just in terms of it, they got paid last month, so they must be also paid this month. So what happened there? What is the process that the department or SASSA used to pay these beneficiaries? And then the other one, in terms of in slide 6, the receivables, you indicated that overpayments to beneficiaries not included in the financial records. So it was not included anywhere else. So they left it out. Is it maybe because they thought that it won't get our attention because it's not there in the financial records? And then in terms of the leadership did not ensure adequate systems in place to ensure sufficient reviews of financial statements and underlying records. So my take on this is, so this is also indicating that there is no internal auditing processes that is taking place, or there is no internal auditing unit in the department to get this information before submitting or before uh, putting it into the financial statements. And then the other one that I have an issue with is that DSD does not monitor the numbers or grants that that SASSA is being paid. So how can they monitor these numbers if they don't have what is supposed to happen? And then in terms of slide 7, Puleng indicated that investigations are not taking place in terms of this non-compliance of SASSA or any other entity of the department. So nothing is happening in these cases. So you won't know if there is anything that was not, or any compliance that they did not make or did not comply with. And then in terms of the gender-based command center, there was a few months that that did not even operate in any instance. So in that month, were there any expenditure in terms of that command center budget? And then indicate, or you indicated that NDA performance bonuses was not paid according with the board approval. What was the process on which this or I must not ask what was the process. What was the bonuses that were allocated, and what did the board approve in terms of these bonuses? And then, according to the Public Audit Act 25 of 2004, the AG it is indicated in 1B that the AG has the power to take remedial action. If you can clarify what is this remedial action and what is the time frame after which process the AG can start with this remedial action. And then on slide 18, the AG indicated there were beneficiaries, the amount of beneficiaries that, or the amount of money that was paid to beneficiaries that are outside South Africa, more than 3 months, beneficiaries without valid IDs, as well as deceased beneficiaries and duplicate beneficiary payments. So I just want to get from the team of the AG, what is the process that you as the AG took to get this information? So if you can manage to access this information, why can't the department not access this information? So that is all from my side. Ms. Marcel, over to you. Not Marcel, Michelle, over to you.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks you for the questions. I'm going to start with the last questions, but I'll also be sharing the responses with Pule. In terms of the last question you asked, in terms of our process, the office, we are auditing all of government. So we will have access to your PERSAL, your GPF. So any institute within government that we audit, we will have access to the database. So what we've done with the team for SASSA is that we took the data from SASSA and we just ran it through the databases that we have. So if you can look at that, we've raised the GPF and the PERSAL members. We also have the database from Home Affairs, so we're able to run that. There's nothing stopping SASSA from having the databases, because all you need to do is actually have negotiations with those departments and enter into memorandum of agreements. But what is important that we noted is that SASSA will get a database. I think for the Home Affairs, they'll get a database, but it will not be real time either. Because if you look at these, the system that they have, for example, if you go to the bank and the bank now does the passports. If you go to the bank and you actually want to even open up an account or access something in the bank, they actually have access to Home Affairs, almost an immediate access. So the minute you put in your fingerprint, that information does come through, and that's why the banks are even able to give us passports at this point in time. SASSA does not have a sophisticated system like that. And what we're saying is that for the money that the SASSA has got, and the amount of beneficiaries that is distributing to, it should have a sophisticated system. If you look at where we are heading in terms of AI, in terms of cyber attacks, we should be having a system that is sophisticated enough to be able to capture, to be able to identify fraud, to prevent fraud from happening, and to also identify the eligible beneficiaries. So at this point in time, the system that they have is not able to integrate in the sophistication that it is required, and which is a concern for us. We have the databases and we are able to do it, but we are also able to do it at a point in time, and not necessarily what SASSA is needing is more something that is that can assist at the present moment. I mean, even if you're 5 days outdated, that should still be a fine, because you'll be able to catch it in the next month. But at this point in time, they're not able to catch it as and when it happens. In terms of the MI process, so the MI, we issue a notification. So if you look at the one that is currently live for the department, we've issued a notification. Now, there are delays in terms of the disciplinary processes, and which we understand. Because if you're going to take somebody through a disciplinary process, the labor relations laws comes into play. There are delays, people get sick on the day, and there are those delays. But I think we have also reached a point where there are the ones that have been finalized, and there are ones that we are at a point where we are now looking at it differently to say the delays for the remaining ones, is it a valid delay, or is there something more? And if we conclude at this in the next few months that these delays are not necessarily valid delays, or we don't see them as something that should delay the process of disciplinary action, then we will go to remedial. And remedial is a process where now it's a bit more legal. So at this point in time, it depends on how the processes in terms of disciplinary take time to address it. So I'm not necessarily going to have it won't be fixed, but I think something that is over a year starts to make us wonder, and it does open up that door to say, I think now we should take it to remedial action, because maybe the reasons for the delays are not appropriate. So we do look at each case separately, depending on the process that is being followed, and then we take it for remedial. But I know that at the office, once something is over a year, we do try zoom into it. We do zoom into it a bit more by the committee that does deal with the material irregularities, and to see that what is the next steps then going forward. So this one for DSD is actually at that point in time where we actually call it a backlog, a material irregularity that we need to move with. For NDA, we did not see an approval from the board, so that's why we've raised it as it is. Maybe that one we can ask the NDA to say what did the board approve, but we didn't necessarily see an approval for the bonuses, and that is a concern. In terms of the GBV center, the months that it was not functioning, remember there was a transition between the previous supplier that did not provide the services, and Buleng had mentioned that there was a 1.2 million that was paid to that supplier, that we deem as a loss for the department. So it is raised in that regard. So in the months that it was not functioning, there was no service provider. It was almost just standing still, but there is that 1.2 million that was paid and no services were rendered, that we've highlighted as a financial loss. In terms of the consequence management and who did not do what, so for us to identify who did not do what, it is if it's a supply chain matter and it's a procurement matter, it will be the supply chain official that is responsible for that. And the department will have, or the entities will definitely have, the names of those people. But remember now, it is the responsibility of the accounting authority as well as the DG, or the accounting authority or the DG, to implement the consequence management. So from our side as the AGSA, even though you will have that, and maybe that's something that the committee can request, because the investigation reports or the transgressions, they have the listings. So they'll have the listing to say, SCM official did not do 3 quotations, this is the amount. So they'll have that register. But it is the accounting authority and or the DG that must go and implement that consequence management. The PFMA is very clear that any transgressions, the accounting officer's responsibility is to go and investigate. And if you are an accounting authority, an accounting officer not doing your part, then I think that is where the question should be, to say, then what should happen? Because that is your responsibility in terms of the PFMA. Because once the accounting officer investigates, they will then identify what is the real problem. And if they find out that the transgression, it was fraudulent, or the transgression is just that maybe not understanding of a particular individual, then the accounting officer must then come up with internal controls that will then prevent these things from happening. So as much as we do know who is there, but we do lift it to say, but that is your responsibility as an accounting authority and an accounting officer. And once the departments come, one of the requests that and if you look at our recommendations to the committee, we do say that follow up on the investigations as well as consequence management. And part of that is getting that register to say, give us the register of your investigations. And even they do say which ones would be fraud or which ones will be non-compliance or and which status they are at. And if they have not investigated, you'll also be clearly seen to say not yet stated, for example, your NDAs. And that registers are available and they should be able to provide them to you to be able to also scrutinize and say what happened to this, what happened to that. Some of the cases have been submitted to SARS, but if you look at how many of the matters are sitting as not investigated, therefore, it would mean that some of those, if there's fraud within those, then they would not to SARS, sorry, to the police. However, if there's ones that are sitting as outstanding under the consequence management, then it means that the people that have transgressed have not necessarily been reported. From the Auditor General's perspective, especially on the files that are missing, we've issued, there's about 17,000 files that we've identified. I think those are also on that particular slide. Just get to the slide 17. So we have a few files, I think 73,000 beneficiary files that we could not obtain. We've given the department the listing. They are busy finding those files. And when we start the new year, we will be looking at whether the ones that they've identified as what they have done. So where they've identified themselves as fraud, we will then make sure that they've either been taken into the SIU or they've been investigated further accordingly. And where the ones that they say maybe they have found, we will then be auditing those to make sure that, yes, they are there. And if they are not there, then what is the next step forward? So in terms of those 73 files, we've given them, we've qualified the department in terms of the files, those beneficiaries. And now the next step is to say, what does this mean and what has been done? And if we identify that not much has been done, this is where then our powers will then start kicking in again. And then we'll go through the process of a material irregularity or not. So the 73 files, I think it's something that the committee can also ask to say, how far are you with those files? Have you found them or not? Because definitely when we start the audit in the next few weeks, this is the first step we're going to take and to see whether what has happened to those that they've also identified as fraudulent and the ones that they said have been found. Let me pause there and give Puleng an opportunity to tackle some of the areas.
Thanks, Michelle. Maybe to add on the beneficiary file that will be linked to the question of the fraud cases in Gauteng and in Eastern Cape. The Gauteng one, I think all the 11 officials were arrested and then the Eastern Cape one, I know, is currently with SIU. So there is currently something happening on those specific ones. So in terms of reporting, they do report these fraudulent cases to SIU. But in certain instances, you will find that, remember the PRECA Act sometimes says that if you are aware and then the amount is above 100,000 rands, then you should report it to SAPS. And if it's less than 100,000, then those that will be the ones that are not necessarily reported to the SAPS. And then with regards to the process of receivables, so what would have then happened is that all the issues that we have identified they would have then followed it up and to ensure that those numbers are reported in their annual financial statements. So it appears as if no work has been done on those specific issues that have been identified as well. That's why resulting in those numbers basically being understated in the financial statements of the department on that particular regard. And then with regard to internal audit, there is internal audit at the department and SASSA. Again, the unique relationship between the two parties. So you're getting SASSA that is actually also getting a grant from the department of 7 billion for its operation. And then you get the 270 billion for grants payment. So that 270 is not getting into SASSA's books. So it's a direct payments to households. Now, because the problem comes in because SASSA is the one that is administering. So it's really paying, it's administering in terms of application and payment, but they don't recognize the amount in their books. So the internal audit within SASSA itself would more likely concentrate mostly on the 7 billion, right? And then also at the department, you will then have instances whereby the internal audit that side concentrate on the administrative side of the department and leaving the 260 billion. So there was nothing much that was done mostly on the 260 billion up until recently, where we're seeing that there's a bit of combined assurance that is also coming out to then identify where I think the audit committee indicated that the plan needs to be changed. The internal audit plan needs to be adjusted so that it can cover the grants part of it. So we're hoping that in the 25-26 financial year, there will be improvement in terms of those specific one on internal audit. And then I think, Michelle, you would have covered the process that we performed in terms of the people outside the country. And I agree with Honorable Maluleka there in terms of Mokweli, in terms of checking the financial status of those people that would have been identified to be outside the country. Currently, as I indicated, there's no control to even identify that people are outside the country. So this would be, the first part will be, have I identified that bullion was outside the country? What is the financial status of bullion? So that is currently not done by the department or SASSA on that particular regard. I think the audit opinion one, Michelle, you would have then covered it in terms of the qualification part. And then on the 3 quotations part, I think, Michelle, you also covered it in terms of the work that we would have done. Currently on our side, it's almost, because when you do the work on the ground, especially when you do the testing, you can't identify that it was supply chain official 1 or 2 or 3. So on our side, we get that the requests were made and all those things, and then we then set officials. Hence, the investigation part becomes important from the department's point of view, to then investigate to see who did not do what they're supposed to do and why they did not do what they're supposed to do, and what consequence should we then implement to ensure that we don't have a repeat issues of this specific one. And then again, on Honorable Sibande, I think we said the 33 million, and not the 133, 33 million that has not been allocated. So currently, I know SASSA CFO is designing processes and controls to ensure that they try to identify who within this 33 million has actually paid the department back for the ineligible receipts of grants on that particular management. On regard of senior management, who are not reviewing, I think we did escalate this issue to the DG as well in terms of the performance information. So the DG again is aware of this one. It goes back again to consequence management, because on consequence it's not necessarily limited only to maybe compliance or supply chain related issues. In certain instances like this, one needs to go back and say, why is this issue happened? Is it because there is no resources within a specific department? Do we need to capacitate? Is it because of lack of knowledge? So there needs to be a thorough investigation so that they can understand the real root cause in terms of this specific one. And then I think the criminal cases, we would have then dealt with it to say that they are reported in terms of the Eastern Cape and those specific ones. So I think, Michelle, we would have covered all the other issues. And then again, I think some of the weaknesses that were coming out from the department where we say that they don't have controls or systems that they do to validate the data. One of the key weaknesses or root cause is the inspectorate. As Michelle has already indicated, the inspectorate's role is basically to do that process, to validate, to do almost what we are doing for the department before we come in. So some of these issues, they would have then picked them up, but we know that they have not really appointed the director of inspectorate at this point in time. So we know we got assurances that by year end of by this year, they should have appointed the inspectorate. So we'll see on that specific one. That is one of the vacancies that we will also follow up on. Chair, that is that on our side. I will then hand back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Puleng. We really appreciate your responses. If any of our members is not satisfied with the responses, they can write to your office through the secretariat to get the necessary responses. Thank you very much for availing yourself. Michelle, you and the team is released.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, honorable members.
Honorable members, the next item on the agenda is the minutes of the 8th of October 2025. Can I get a mover for the adoption of the minutes? Honorable Makwele.
Thank you, Chairperson. I move.
Thank you. Honorable Adriaanse.
I second, Honorable Chairperson.
Honorable members, I think that is the business of the day. In terms of our studies tour, I think we will get an update next week. So, honorable members, the support staff, thank you very much for your time and efforts, as well as questions to the AG in terms of the Department of Social Development. This meeting stands adjourned.
Thank you,
Lekker
Chairperson.
dagie.
Goodbye.
Thank you,
Fortsetter.
Chair.
Thank you. Bye.